No one expected that a simple adventure vlog would turn into a haunting mystery that still keeps people awake at night. A year ago, Emily Carter, a popular travel blogger known for her fearless solo trips, packed up her bright orange kayak and set out to explore the winding waterways of the Florida Everglades. Her plan was to spend 3 days capturing raw, unseen parts of the wetlands for her growing channel. She posted one last video update from a small wooden dock, laughing as the sun dipped behind the mangroves. That was the last time anyone ever saw her search teams comb the swamps for weeks. Helicopters hovered low over sawgrass fields, airboats cut through hidden channels, but not a single clue turned up. No kayak, no gear, no sign of Emily. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some people blamed the alligators. Others whispered about hidden dangers deep in the marshes that no map shows. Her followers left thousands of comments begging for answers. But the swamp kept its secrets. Now, almost exactly 1 year later, a local fisherman named Jake Thomas was out early, checking his old crab traps near a remote bend in the river. Just another routine morning, but when he hauled up one of his traps, something strange caught his eye. Stuck between the rusted bars wasn't just the usual tangle of weeds and shells. There was something that shouldn't be there at all. Jake froze, the morning air thick with mosquitoes and the buzz of cicadas. What he found made his heart race, and when he called the sheriff, the tiny dock where Emily filmed her last vlog filled up again with reporters and flashing lights. Could this finally be the clue that breaks open Emily Carter's disappearance? Will the Everglades hold on to its secrets once more? When news of Jake's find spread through the small fishing town, people gathered at the marina, whispering theories and old fears that had never really died down. Some swore Emily Carter had just gotten lost, while others believed something darker lurked in the remote parts of the Everglades. Even the local sheriff, who had closed the case months ago, now stood at the riverbank, staring into the muddy water as if it might suddenly spit out all the answers. Emily wasn't just another tourist. She had built her whole channel on exploring hidden places alone, abandoned cabins in the woods, forgotten lighthouses, the edges of ghost towns. She had a way of making people feel like they were right there with her, watching her push through thick vines, laughing off strange noises in the dark. Her followers loved her bravery, but her family always worried her adventures would one day lead her somewhere she couldn't come back from. Now, with Jake's crab traps sitting on the dock, under a blue tarp, everyone wanted to know the same thing. What exactly did he pull up from that murky bend in the river? Some said it was just old camping gear tangled in weeds, but a few people claimed they saw a piece of fabric faded and torn. The same bright teal as the jacket Emily always wore in her videos. Locals who once shrugged off the mystery now locked their doors a little earlier. Tourists avoided the narrow side trails that Emily had once called magical. And deep in the swamp, the buzz of insects covered any sound of secrets still buried under tangled roots and black water. As the sun slipped behind the trees that night, Jake sat alone in his boat, replaying the moment he pulled up that trap, wondering if he'd really uncovered a clue or awakened something that should have stayed hidden. Jake couldn't shake the feeling that the swamp was watching him. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw that bit of teal fabric tangled in the wire, soaked and heavy, like it had been waiting all this time. The sheriff took the crab trap away, promising updates. But Jake knew how things worked around here. Secrets sank fast in the Everglades, just like everything else. He started sleeping with his old radio on, listening for any hint that someone else knew what he'd found. Meanwhile, Emily's younger sister, Hannah, came back into town. She'd stayed away since the search ended, unable to stand the sight of the dock or the winding trails where she'd once waited for Emily to pop out of the trees, grinning with a fresh story for her next vlog. Hannah had always warned Emily that some places weren't meant to be explored alone. Now she stood on the same dock, staring at the water, wondering if her sister's fearless spirit had finally pushed too far. Locals said they'd seen strange lights deep in the mangroves at night, small fires flickering where no camper should be. Some even claimed they'd heard a woman's voice drifting over the water, too clear to be just the wind. A few old fishermen swapped stories of an abandoned shack hidden beyond the main trails, where hunters used to stay decades ago. No one goes there anymore, but some believe Emily might have found it first, online. Emily's loyal followers didn't sit quietly either. Her fan forums blew up overnight, with armchair detectives dissecting every frame of her last video. They zoomed in on shadows in the background, argued about blurred figures near the tree line. Some fans planned their own trip into the Everglades, convinced they could solve the mystery the police never could. And somewhere out there, past the sunlit trails and tourist boats, the swamp kept its secrets close, daring anyone to come and look closer. By the time the sun rose over the swamp again, word had spread so fast that it seemed like everyone with a camera and a theory showed up at the old dock. Jake watched from a distance as strangers in hiking boots and cargo vests unloaded drones and cameras, ready to live stream every muddy trail and hidden bend. Some of them called it justice for Emily Carter. Others just wanted clicks. But all of them felt sure the swamp was finally ready to give up its secrets. Hannah couldn't stand the circus. She slipped away from the cameras, moving down a narrow trail only locals used. She knew her sister better than any stranger on the internet ever could. If Emily had left clues, they wouldn't be obvious. She'd always had her own way of marking her path. As Hannah pushed through the thick brush, she noticed a scrap of orange kayak rope knotted around a branch, almost swallowed by vines. Her heart pounded. She wasn't the only one out here. She could hear voices deeper in the trees. Maybe other searchers? Maybe someone else who didn't want this mystery solved. Back at the dock, Jake sat in his boat, staring at the muddy water that had swallowed so many answers. He kept replaying the moment the trap surfaced, the weight of it, the way the water seemed to cling to the metal like it was hiding something more. He couldn't help but feel he'd stirred up something bigger than a missing girl. Something the swamp itself wanted buried. One of the YouTubers, a big guy named Travis, fired up his drone and sent it buzzing high above the canopy. On his screen, patches of dark water and tangled trees stretched forever. Then he saw it, a clearing deep in the swamp, an unnatural shape barely visible through the trees. He shouted for the others, pointing at the screen. In that moment, the whole crowd on the dock turned toward the swamp, as if they all felt the same cold shiver run down their spines. Out there, in the heat and buzzing insects, lay the thing everyone had been hunting for, and maybe something none of them were ready to find. Travis tried to keep his drone steady, but the signal flickered as the canopy thickened. On the tiny screen, the clearing came into focus, a rundown shack half buried under moss and leaning trees. The tin roof was rusted through in places, but the strange part was the faint glow flickering from inside. No one had any cell service this deep in the swamp, but they knew what they saw. Someone was out there, or something was. Hannah heard the commotion behind her as people shouted about the shack. She pushed faster through the brush, branches scraping her arms. She remembered Emily telling her once about a place she'd marked on an old map, just an old trapper's hut, she'd said, laughing like it was no big deal. Hannah's breath caught in her throat. Maybe Emily had gone there, but why would there still be light inside now? Jake watched the live stream on Travis's phone, his hands trembling. He knew the story's hunters who disappeared decades ago, poachers who'd gone missing near that same spot. Some people whispered the shack was cursed ground, where the swamp swallowed people whole if they stayed too long. But Jake couldn't stay on the dock anymore. He grabbed his old flashlight and his boat keys, ignoring the calls from the other fishermen to stay put. Meanwhile, deep inside the trees, two teenagers from town, curious and foolish, reached the shack first. They'd slipped away from the crowd, hoping for a thrill. They crept up to the sagging door, one of them filming with shaky hands. Through a gap in the wood, they saw piles of gear scattered on the floor. An old sleeping bag, empty food cans, a muddy backpack that looked way too new to be from decades ago. And then they heard a noise, a slow creak of footsteps from somewhere deeper inside the shack. Back at the dock, Hannah finally stepped into the clearing too. She froze when she saw the teenagers' flashlight beams dancing through the cracks. She knew, deep down, that Emily's story didn't end at the dock or in that crab trap. But as she inched closer, every step felt like the swamp was daring her to find out what really waited in the dark. Hannah stepped carefully around the clearing's edge. Her breath caught in her chest as she watched the teenagers freeze by the shack's rotting door. She hissed at them to stay back, but curiosity had already pulled them too far in. The door creaked open under a shaky push, the damp wood moaning like it hadn't moved in years. Inside, the beam of a flashlight flicked across the scattered gear. There, half buried under a moldy tarp, was Emily's bright orange kayak paddle, the same one she'd shown in her last vlog. Hannah's heart twisted. This was really hers. She moved closer, ignoring the buzzing mosquitoes and the heavy air pressing against her lungs. Then a faint sound cut through the night, a cough, rough and weak. One of the teenagers yelped and stumbled back. Hannah rushed in, the beam of her flashlight sweeping over a figure slumped in the far corner. Dirty blankets were piled up, and under them, eyes opened, sunken, scared, but alive. It was Emily. Thin hair tangled, but unmistakably her. She tried to sit up, her voice barely more than a whisper. She'd been hiding here, surviving on whatever she could scavenge. She'd gotten lost deeper in the swamp and hurt her leg bad enough she couldn't paddle out. When she finally found the shack, she stayed put, terrified of the stories she'd once laughed off. Hannah fell to her knees, tears mixing with the swamp's damp air. She wrapped her arms around her sister as the teenagers called for help on their crackling radios. Outside, Jake's flashlight cut through the darkness. He spotted the sisters through the broken window and shouted to the others still crowding the dock. But just as relief washed over them, one of the teenagers stepped back and his foot hit something buried in the dirt floor. A heavy, rusted box. Emily's eyes darted to it. She shook her head weakly. Hannah frowned. In that moment, a realization sank in. Emily hadn't been alone out here the whole time. Whatever she'd stumbled on, whatever secret the swamp was trying to keep hidden, it was still here. And now, with everyone watching, the Everglades had one last secret left to share. Jake pushed through the doorway just as Hannah lifted the rusted box from the dirt. It was heavier than it looked, coated in grime and half swallowed by the swamp. Floor, Emily, still leaning against the wall, shook her head again, trying to speak. Hannah glanced at her sister, then flipped the latch open. Inside, under layers of rotting cloth and old tools, was a stack of faded papers and a tin can full of weathered coins. Relics from hunters or poachers who'd once hidden treasure here and never come back for it. Jake let out a breath. He didn't. No, he'd been holding. The real secret hadn't been a monster or ghost in the swamp. It was just the leftover whispers of old stories and lost people. Emily had stayed alive all this time, close enough for help, but hidden by fear and the thick wild that swallowed any sign of her. The mystery that kept everyone guessing for a year had never really been about a hidden crime. It was about how far someone could go to stay alive. When the world thought they were gone, when the sheriff arrived with search crews, it's a shack filled with warm light for the first time in years. They wrapped Emily in blankets and carried her out through the same trails she'd once hiked so fearlessly. Hannah stayed close, holding her hand tight. Jake followed behind, glancing back at the shack. Part of him half expecting the shadows to swallow it whole again. Emily's story spread fast, from her loyal subscribers to news outlets everywhere. Her survival turned into a lesson that sometimes the wildest places still hold hope, no matter how dark they get. The swamp kept some secrets buried, but this time it gave one back. And for everyone who had watched, searched, or whispered about the Everglades missing blogger, there was finally an ending, one that proved sometimes lost things can find their way home.